Thank you, Lev. So I'm taking the stage after the conclusion that we should take more care of men's health. But since we're discussing gender inequalities, I will focus more on the other side of the coin, where women are the ones who more often survive their partner. And I will tell you a little bit about the implications of this for well-being in general, for life satisfaction, and also for time use. And if we have enough time, I would like to touch upon the economic consequences of widowhood. We'll see where we are after the first part of the presentation. I'm Monika Oczkowska. I work in Poland in Center for Economic Analysis. And this presentation is based on a couple of studies that we've done together with Michał and a couple of other colleagues. Basically, the presentation is an overview of what we found within the topic of widowhood using different data, and maybe, hopefully, since most of the audience are young students, still exploring whatever they can leave for the better of the world, and whatever they can whatever contribution they can have for research or academia. Maybe I will be successful in at least telling you what kind of data is usable and what kind of data you can actually use if you are interested, maybe for your thesis. I know it's quite early to talk about that, but still, hopefully you will find something interesting here. Okay, continuing on Lev's presentation, as we learned, widowhood is quite prevalent in the world, especially in the developed world. So it's the fate of almost half of those who remain in partnerships in later life. It depends on the country, but as you can see, in the US, we have slightly less than a half of those who are 70 plus who become widows. Following what conclusions Lev had, there are many less men who survive longer than their wife. So only 16% of men are widowers. That's why in the whole presentation I will be focusing on women, and but of course the other side is important to acknowledge. And however, it's also important to remember that the consequences of widowhood are different for men and women. In Europe, these numbers are quite similar, but they are even higher in Southeast Asia. In South Korea, 64% of women 70 plus are widows, so they already lost their partner. And as you can see in this graph, it's a proportion, actually it's based on the US data, it's a proportion of women who are 70 plus by marital status, and we're focusing here on this darker gray part. These are widows, and with age from 70 to here we have 95 plus. We have the growing share of widows among those who survive until a certain age. So we know that the problem, issues related to widowhood, it's a real problem, and actually the problem is growing quite fast in developed countries. With this graph, I wanted to show you how rapidly the number of widows is growing with time. So it's number of deceased men who were married at the time of their death, and how it grew since 2007 in different countries. And it doesn't really matter which line is which country. As you can see, in most of these countries, the number of deceased men grew quite fast. In some countries, even as fast as 30%, so 30% more deceased men after 12 years, as compared to, if we compare 2019 and 2007, here let's call it the leaders, so over 20 or even 25% increase in Austria, Czech Republic, and the Netherlands. And of course, these trends are related not only in the fact that longevity is growing, so people are living longer to older ages. We have better healthcare, so in general, people keep their health for longer and they do not die as quickly as many years before. But it's also related to the fact that more numerous cohorts are coming of age. These are the baby boomers, so the cohorts, big cohorts that were born after war. So right now, they are in the old age. That's why the number of deceased men are growing quite fast, and the number of widows are growing quite fast. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has had its toll. There are many research papers that give us evidence that actually men were affected more by the pandemic. They were more likely to have serious health consequences related to contracting COVID, and they were also more likely to die of COVID for many reasons there. But COVID had its additional contribution to growing numbers of women in widowhood. We know a lot about widowhood from the literature so far, but it's mainly sociological and epidemiological literature. We know that widowhood affects health. We know that it affects mental health. We also know that it may affect the surviving partner's probability of death. There are many studies about that, but so far economists haven't done that much. They are mainly interested in widowhood as a shock, more or less considered as exogenous shock. So there are, of course, studies who look at widowhood and the consequences of widowhood. The one by Clark and colleagues looks at adaptation effects, how women adapt to the situation after their partner dies. What are the problems with these studies and the problems that we try to address in our work? There are not many outcomes that they look at, so in terms of well-being or in terms of mental health. As you will see a bit later on, you need to have a really extensive and very broad survey in order to capture a lot of information about individuals. So it's quite a complicated process to first collect this data, but then also process it, and it's there are not many surveys that provide you with this information. Another problem are small sizes. So most of the sociological studies, they're based on like just a number of women in widowhood. The attempt on identifying the potential moderators, whatever affects the relation of widowhood and a widow's health or well-being, these are also limited. This study, one of our studies, is also or at the time when we were publishing it, it was one of the few that looked at time use among widows. The results that I'm showing here in the presentation are based on two research papers that have been published quite recently. And a free policy brief, hopefully you will get there in terms of economic consequences of widowhood. A policy brief where we looked at the implications of reform to the survivors system in Poland. This is an overview of the presentation, and actually this is Michał's idea how to summarize it in short words, and but I really liked it because I will start with challenges, then I will show you a bit of different results, how widowhood affects different outcomes of individuals. And then again, I will discuss some challenges that are still left there, and actually maybe one of you will be interested to explore them and to take this research further. There's definitely enough field and enough questions left to explore and discuss. And then, after the part where I would like to look at how widowhood affects well-being, I will talk rather briefly about economic consequences of widowhood. So what are we interested in from the perspective of the challenges related to data? So what we would like to get is the causal effect of widowhood on well-being. And also we would like to see how this effect, how widowhood affects well-being over time, how this changes. Because as you can imagine, widows have a certain well-being before the partners die, the partner dies. But then after the partner dies, following what I said about adaptation effects, at first, they might be depressed, they might be really sad about it, but then time passes and they adjust, and also their well-being adjusts. So in order to explore these two, What are the challenges related to the data? So the population is quite selective. So normally, as I also showed you some statistics on widows, they were based on women 70 plus. So this is a problem that mainly affects the older part of the society. And of course, as you can imagine, we are only looking at those who manage to survive to a certain age. So we are losing a lot of women on the way there. So it's already a quite selective population. Those, if we capture them in the survey and we explore what is their well-being after they became widows. Then, of course, we want the information to be collected over time. It's perfect when the information is collected before someone becomes a widow and afterwards, and it's even more perfect when it's over a long time, so that then we can actually explore whether there are any adaptation effects and how this changes over time. The type of the survey needs to be, it needs to be a social survey. So it needs to collect a lot of more or less subjective information on well-being. And normally this is not collected in admin surveys. You don't have questions on your life satisfaction when you're filling in your income statement. So you don't have that in the admin data. And while admin data may be perfect for many types of research questions, you cannot address well the question on how well-being is affected by widowhood just with admin data. And this information on well-being needs to be supplemented with comprehensive background information so that we can actually explore the causality and possible moderators. So what impacts the strength and direction of the relationship between widowhood and well-being. In order to look at the first question, so whether the effect of widowhood on well-being is causal, one can think of widowhood as an exogenous shock, from the perspective that it is rather unlikely that it was women's well-being that made the men die. So we are almost sure that it's women's well-being is affected by partner's death rather than the other way around, where it's the women's well-being that affects the death. And then, in most cases, it's an unexpected and an unpredictable event of someone dying. Although, of course, we can here discuss different types of deaths, and we will actually, I will show you some results where we are looking at the differences between the cases where a women's partner died suddenly or more or less suddenly in an accident or in an illness that lasted only a couple of days or weeks, rather than cases where it was a terminal illness and they died slower over some months, over some years even. You will see how differently the well-being over time of the widow before even widowhood looks like. But even though if we could try to argue that widowhood is an exogenous shock, the timing of widowhood from the perspective of well-being is not. So what if women whose partners died early also had, what if the sample is biased in the sense that women whose partners died early had on average overall lower well-being? To be able to say that the effect is exogenous, we want to identify and have a good reference group for those who became widowed. And we want to have a lot of background information to match the group of those who became widowed and the reference group. In our studies, the reference group is the group of those who were continuously married while the others lost their partners. I've already mentioned sample selection, and that in the sense that sample of widows is already quite selective because it's the people who survive to certain ages. But widowhood also has an effect, like a further effect on sample selection. And there are some consequences on that. In a sense that since it affects women's health or well-being, they are less likely to survive longer. They are less likely to be captured in the survey. In terms of the evolution of the effect over time, of course, if we administer a survey, we cannot really plan for capturing as many widows as possible because we don't know when someone will die. So we don't know if someone who is now in the survey and we observe this person while she is still married, we may hope that at some point her husband will die, but we don't know when this will happen. And what we want for a study like this, we want to observe the person before and after. So from this perspective, the best we can do is to have like a large population surveyed and then follow this population over time, hoping that as many, some will become widows, some will stay married, and we can then explore the differences in their well-being. So what kind of data we need in order to look at these research questions? It's the same data that Michał already gave you an overview of. It's a survey of health, aging, and retirement in Europe. And while Belarus is not part of this data set, you won't find data on Belarus. Well, hopefully, maybe sometime in the future, Belarus will be added. Right now, all the countries from the European Union are covered. So it's still an interesting data set, and the information is collected in a comparable way, so we can actually compare the responses of people in Italy and in Poland, and you will know that they were collected in the same manner, and they are comparable. So for these studies, we are not using all the different countries that collected this data, but just 19 who participated in many waves, so that we can observe women who became widowed and those who were continuously married over time. The study is perfect for this type of research question because it is focused on people aged 50 plus. And another huge benefit is that it also, in the interview, not only the woman takes part, but oftentimes, most of the time, if the partner is still there, we capture information also on the husband. So 2 people in the household participate. So we not only have all the different information before the husband died on the woman, but also on the husband. It's a panel study, so we follow the same individuals every 2 years. And for this study, we're using data collected between 2004 and 2017. The samples are relatively large, and they are supposed to be representative for each country, for population aged 50 plus in each country. And in this study, we capture a lot of well-being outcomes, like satisfaction. Michał mentioned CASP, but also mental health information, physical health information, and this information is collected consistently over time, so we know that we can compare people's responses over time, that the design of the survey did not affect how people responded. And a lot of background information is collected in the survey. So not only about current situation, for example, people's social networks, who is important for them, with whom they have contacts currently, but some additional benefits of the survey is childhood information, and also for many people we collect a lot of information about their life history, where they worked, how was their health over time, and how it changed over the life, or over their life. And the last point here are end-of-life interviews, which are collected for those people who participated in the survey but then died. And we conduct an interview, like an additional interview after the person dies with someone close, in many cases with the surviving spouse, but it might be also another relative. So we gather a lot of information on the last months of life of the deceased. So the widowed sample that we have from the study consists of over 3,000 women, and these women were observed at least twice in the survey. So at least once before their partner died, and at least once after the partner died. And the reference group is here, those who were also observed at least twice in the survey, but who were partner at the first observation. They had a partner still living, and they were continuously married at the time of the second observation. Okay. Well, this graph is supposed to give you an idea how complicated the survey is, and how complicated the histories, the participation histories of people, how complicated they are. So these are like 50 randomly selected participants of the SHARE survey. These are widowed participants. So at some point, at time 0, their partner died. And with respect to this time, we're looking at their subsequent participation in different waves of data collection. So there are people who were observed only once, and each color bubble tells you in which wave the person participated. So there are people who were observed only once before their partner died, but there are also people who were observed multiple times before their partner died. And then they are observed multiple times after their partner dies. So we get a lot of information for these widows. And as you can imagine, we can see how their well-being changes over time before the partner dies, but not immediately before the partner dies, because for those who participated many years before the partner dies, we can see whether this well-being of to be widowed is similar to the one of continuously married, and we can make sure that it is. And then we can observe for many years how their well-being, how their mental health changed over time once the partner died, whether it picked up, whether they recovered, or whether they stayed, for example, depressed over a longer period of time. With respect to survey participation, there is no specific pattern of survey participation relative to the time of partner's death. So what it means is that we observe people at different times before the death, except for the months that are close to when partner dies, because for natural reasons, women at that time have other concerns, and they are less likely to participate in the survey. But from these three graphs, what you can see here, it's our sample of widows, and we split the sample between those who participated in the survey for at most 2 years. So at most 2 years were between the first and the last participation, and then many less of these as compared to, for example, those who were observed for a much longer time, before the death and also after the death of the partner. So how do we make sure that those women who lost their partner are similar to the ones who were continuously married? How do we make sure that the effect of widowhood on well-being is causal? We're using matching techniques. So we want the still married to be almost identical to the widows. We use propensity score matching on a set of variables that are related to the woman, but also to their partner. These can be variables fixed over time, like education or number of children or childhood health, but also these variables can be time varying from before widowhood. At the first stage of matching, we do exact matching by country. So we only match people from Poland with, so widows from Poland with married women from Poland. And for married women, we of course don't have the time of death of the partner, and we need to impute it. How do we do this? We do that proportionally to the matched, to the time of death for the matched widow. And this sample is used for non-parametric estimates of time to widowhood on well-being. But there's another part of the study where, again, longitudinally, we look at the role of family and social networks and whether family having close contact with children or having like a tight social network, whether it helps you if widowhood happens, if your partner dies, whether it helps you for your well-being, in short. But since social networks were collected only in wave 4, this study is not based on all the waves between wave 1 and 7 of share, but it's only limited to wave 4 and wave 6. So 4 years in between. So we look at participants in wave 6, conditional on having partner in wave 4. So in wave 4, we need to have both those who in wave 6 lost their partner and those who were still married in wave 6. And we look how the social network information, how the tightness and the number of people that you have in social network, how at the time of wave 4, how this affects the relationship between widowhood and well-being further on. Okay. I will first start with mental health. These graphs tell you how widowhood affects depression or the likelihood of being depressed. So let's focus on the left-hand side graph for a moment. So in this graph, at time 0, we have the time since death of partner, which is the actual time of death for widows, and the imputed time of death for married. Married here are the controls. So the further we go from time 0 to the left, so it's the past for how these women felt over the past years, and then how they felt after the death of the partner. We split the widowed sample between those whose partner died suddenly in an accident or in a short illness, and those whose partner died who didn't die suddenly, so a terminal illness, because there is a difference, especially just before death. As you can see, if we focus on control, so the married women, the proportion of those who reported that in the last month they cried at all is more or less 35% throughout the whole timing of our observation. And as you can see, for women, if we focus on those whose partner died suddenly, so the red ones, you can see that before the partner dies, it reflects almost exactly the well-being of those who didn't lose the partner. But then, once the partner dies, you can see that this proportion of those who reported crying is much higher. But over time, it goes down. So there are less and less women who cry after time passes, after the death of the partner. Importantly, with the blue line, you have women who lost their partner to terminal illness. And as you can see, even before death, there is a difference in the incidence of reporting crying for these women as compared to married women. So these women whose partner was already ill for quite some time before he died, they were more likely to cry even before the death of the partner. But then the effect is very similar as for those who suddenly lost the husband. And it also decreases over time. And we have very similar results for other types of measures related to mental health. So on the right-hand side, you have the proportion of those who reported feeling they would rather be dead. And as you can see, even though these estimates are less accurate, you can see very similar results to the incidence of crying. So widows are more likely to feel they would rather be dead after the death of their partner. Then we look at the number of depressive symptoms. In SHARE survey, we have 12 questions that evaluate whether someone has depression or not. And here on the left-hand side, you have the number of these symptoms between 0 and 12. And again, as you can see, after the death of the partner, for widows, this goes up. So they report having more symptoms of depression. And then we have a proportion of those who are at risk of depression. So they report 4 symptoms or more. And again, after death of the partner, this proportion goes up for widows, and it stays at the same level for married women. So we know that widowhood causally affects mental health. Another question is about more general measures of well-being, and here we're looking at life satisfaction, a simple measure. How satisfied with life are you on a scale from 0 to 10? And again, very similar to mental health. Here, of course, we have the reversed scale. So the more satisfied with life are you, the higher value you have. So as you can see, with the death of the partner, women's life satisfaction goes down. But then slowly over time, but just notice that here we're looking at 5 years, up to 5 years after partner's death. So maybe after 5 years, their life satisfaction goes back to the same level as for continuously married women. So the effect is quite strong, and it also recovers quite long over time. And then we differentiate this effect by different types of women. So we split women by their education. So we want to see whether education may be considered as a moderating effect on the impact of widowhood on life satisfaction. And actually, what we find in this graph, it is because those who have low education, they are married women are here, so they already have a lower, in general, level of life satisfaction, but the drop for widows is much bigger if they have low education than for widows who had higher education. But interestingly, if we split these women by having a child that lives close by, we don't see a similar effect. So for widows, it seems that it doesn't really matter whether they live close, whether they have a child that lives close by or not. In both cases, their life satisfaction drops by the same magnitude. What is interesting is that for those who have a child that lives close by, we can see that if we compare married women with child living close by and widowed with a child living close by, before partner's death, they have a slightly higher level of life satisfaction, meaning that probably they receive some help from the child, and this actually affects their well-being even before the death of the husband. Well, okay, so now one could ask himself or herself whether this effect of widowhood on life satisfaction differs by different pre-widowhood characteristics. Because we do not find much of an effect when we look at family status, so when we look at having a child living close by and those who do not have such a child, while I would say that we would expect it to find something there. So for the purpose of exploring not only the family status of widows, but also their social networks, maybe having a child living close by doesn't help women after partner's death because they don't have such a close relation with the child. Maybe what is more important are friends. So in order to explore this, since we have social network in the Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe only in wave 4, we couldn't conduct the exact same analysis with evolution of life satisfaction over time. What we could do was run some simple OLS regressions where we look at life satisfaction and the effect of widowhood. And then with each specification, we are adding more information about widows and about still married women before they become widowed. But what we can see is actually the coefficient on widowhood is negatively related with being satisfied with life. So it's a bivariate variable that captures whether someone is satisfied with life or not. And this effect doesn't really change once we control for demographics. It doesn't really change once we control for having family, for having children living close by. But it also doesn't really change when we control for social network. So it is still has the same magnitude and is still statistically significantly related to people's life satisfaction. So we asked ourselves whether maybe time use can have an influence on how widowhood affects well-being. And for that purpose, we explored a different type of data. We looked at, first I'm going to show you some descriptives on how time allocation changes in widowhood. And to do that, here I will use the cross-sectional type of data, so the data collected for different individuals over different waves. In the American Time Use Survey from 2003 to 2018, how the data on time use is collected. So people fill in a diary where for one representative day, they report what they were doing every 5 minutes. So they report that they were sitting in a boring class for, I don't know, 2 hours. They also report with whom they were doing that. And we actually captured this information for the whole day of the people. So we know what they were doing during the whole day. And we use this data to check whether after a partner dies, whether women do different things than those who are married. And as you can imagine, actually what is in this table, while we split widows between those who just recently lost their partner and those who were widowed for a longer time, the most important thing is that they do change their time allocation. They spend less time in home production, and actually this comes mainly from cutting back on food preparation and housework. They don't have the husband for whom they were cooking. Their cleaning may be less. But it's not that they are mainly engaging in less of that each day, not doing it less frequently. And they are putting more of this time into other activities, mainly TV watching and other leisure activities. Since partner's death, over time they adapt, so they change their use of time over time. Whether there is a change in with whom they spend time. Naturally, there is. First of all, they spend much more time alone. They previously were spending a lot of time, married women spend a lot of time with their spouse. Where for widows, we don't have these bars because there's no spouse, so they cannot really spend time with their spouse. So where this bar goes, it goes here to other relatives. Widows spend more time with other relatives, a bit more time with friends, but mostly they spend more time alone. So we asked ourselves whether this can actually maybe explain the effect of widowhood that we observe on life satisfaction, on well-being. And this is exactly what we've done. We've used similar data on time use for 4 different countries. So we were again using the US, but also Poland, France, and the UK. These countries collected necessary information in their time use survey. But this data is again, these are the diaries where during the day people were reporting what they were doing and with whom. And using this data, we again run regressions where we look at the effect of widowhood on life satisfaction, on whether someone is satisfied with life. And when we control only for widowhood, we can see this negative effect of widowhood on life satisfaction. But then we control for the demographics, and in most cases, it doesn't change much. So the effect of widowhood on life satisfaction is still negative. We then control for how the time is spent, so what people are doing. As you can see, in these countries, this again doesn't change much. What changes, you can see for the last type of regression, if we control with whom people spend time, so in the regression, we put information that married women spend more time with their partner and widowed women spend more time alone. It appears that the effect of widowhood is no longer statistically significant, which means that with spending more time alone, you can actually explain the effect of widowhood on lower life satisfaction of widows. Okay, so to summarize, very briefly, with quite unique data that we have, we look at how widowhood affects well-being of people, and we can see that widowhood causes significant decreases in mental health and life satisfaction of widows. The recovery is slow, especially for widows with low education. But then family composition and social network do not really matter for this recovery in well-being of widows. What matters is how they use their time, or in other words, with whom they spend time with, because widows seem to spend much more time alone, and this is what actually is visible in this decreased life satisfaction. There are some further challenges that I wanted to discuss a bit, but I'm running out of time. So I'm not sure, because Lev told me that it's 2 minutes. Maybe I should finish well, or maybe I should just go through the last bit. So some further challenges. So I promised you that we're going to start with challenges, then we're going to try to tackle some of them, and then we're going to go back to challenges. So even though we find quite interesting results, one of the problems is that widows are less likely to participate overall in surveys, and then attrition for widows is probably bigger. So you are just less likely to observe them over time once the partner dies, and in general they are less likely to be there in the survey. On top of that, what might be behind this is that widowhood may cause poorer health and death, actually, of the surviving partner. And the question is whether participation of the surviving widow is different immediately before and after death. Probably they are less likely to participate in the survey because their husband just died, so they're not gonna answer questions for an hour and a half because they are just too sad to do it. So what this would mean for our estimates is that they would be underestimated. So the effect that we observed, that I showed you, is underestimated. Meaning that we probably observe only the healthiest and happiest of widows. If it was that those who were most affected by widowhood in terms of health or in terms of dying, they were less likely to participate, then the true recovery that we should find would be slower. If it was that those who became widowed are less likely to participate at the time just before a partner's death or after a partner's death, then the true drop would be probably larger, but then the recovery would be steeper. So depending, it would be good to actually include the differences in participation of widows, because in a preliminary study that we've conducted, we can see that close to partner's death, which is here for widows, there's a big chunk of those who are not participating, much bigger than for married women, obviously. And you can see this drop in participation also here in this graph, immediately before, immediately after death. So probably the problem it would be important to include participation and non-participation in estimations of the true effect of widowhood on well-being. And yes, and here I will finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. So, oops, yep. There is no schedule. Yeah, so we'll have another coffee break, after which we'll come back and talk a little bit. We'll try to discuss what we've learned today and what can we get from all these topics. And then we'll have, yeah, don't go home after the panel discussion, because we'll have lunch at 2:30, I think, yeah. So, yeah, let's have a break.